On today's show, we dive into a detailed scouting report on Victor Eklund, the paciest playmaker eligible in the 2025 NHL Draft.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we're going to do a deep dive on one of my favorite players in this entire draft class, Victor Eklund. So if you're new to the channel, this is a series that we do, spending a full half hour delving deep into the nitty-gritty on 2025 draft eligible prospects as part of a playlist that we're going to be building between now and the draft. And in the end, we'll probably be covering over 50 of the prospects in this draft class. Victor Eklund is an incredibly pacey playmaker, and I'm excited to dive into the show today. But before we do that, I hope that you're all having a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you are listening to this. It's a very cold, snowy, windy snowstorm day here on the North American East Coast on this pretty nice Sunday to stay indoors, in all honesty, and the right kind of weather to think about hockey and delve into one of the funnest players in this draft class. So let's start off with this player's profile. So Victor Eklund has scored quite a few points this year. This is a 5'11", 161-pound right shot left winger. He can play on the right wing as well. And he's been playing in Hockey Allsvenskan this season with Djurgården IF. It's the second tier of Swedish professional hockey. Very good quality of competition against men. A lot of pace in that league overall. And he's been faring extraordinarily well under those circumstances. As you can see on screen, if you're watching on YouTube, on the graphic, Eklund has played 34 games in Allsvenskan this season, scoring 12 goals and 23 points, which is good for the best, a top among teenagers in scoring in the league. And he's top 10 in like U22, U23 scoring as well. It's been a really impressive year for him, and he broke out onto the scene in Hockey Allsvenskan last season as a D-1, where he played throughout the playoff run for Djurgården on their quest to gain promotion back to the SHL, which didn't quite succeed in the end, but still it was a very strong effort from Eklund in terms of production. I mean, 6 points in 15 games as a 17-year-old in a playoff run against pro competition. Pretty good stuff. So Eklund is a very interesting player who I think a lot of teams are going to be eyeing on draft day, and a lot of that comes down to the pace. But in the first segment, we're going to be delving into the puck skills specifically. In the second, we'll look at the overall toolkit, how his tools interact, as well as his habits on the ice, and we'll break out the tactics board to give you a visual as well for our YouTube watchers. And in the final segment, we're going to wrap up the show by looking ahead where he's projected to go on draft day, where he could be projected in NHL lineup when he hits his prime, as well as which NHL teams are good fits and which NHL players play a similar brand of hockey to this player. All that and more on today's show. So let's just dive right in to the puck skills with Victor Eklund. Starting off with the shot. Even though Eklund has more goals than assists this season with 12 versus 11, this is a playmaker first and foremost. The shot isn't overly mechanically special. There's not an abundance of power behind it, but he selects his moments really well. And what makes him a dangerous goal scorer isn't at all the shooting mechanics, it's the habits underlying it. He gets the dangerous positions. He's constantly driving the middle of the ice. He keeps his feet moving, a low center of gravity. He's difficult to push off the puck, even in a more diminutive frame. I mean, 5'11", 161. He doesn't win every puck battle, but he wins a whole lot more than you'd expect him to against pro competition. And he uses that to get to the dangerous areas, off puck as well, get to the slot. But overall, he's at his best when in motion as a playmaker, rather than a guy that forces himself into the net front area and into those pockets of space as a bumper. You want him more to use his mobility, use his playmaking to create advantages, but still a player that can finish off chances and is a very opportunistic scorer off the rush, has really, really good handling skill, and uses that to deceive both goaltenders and defenders in one-on-one situations or on odd man rushes. He's a very dynamic player when he has space to work with. The playmaking itself is a lot more intriguing in terms of NHL upside and potentially a separation tool at the next level. He's a very intelligent playmaker. He's able to blend his passing, his scanning, his vision so seamlessly with the handling, with the skating ability. We'll delve into that in the toolkit segment coming up after the break. But a lot to like with this player, but it's the underlying pace that creates all of these openings and all of these passing lanes for Victor Eklund. He's constantly pushing defenders back, forcing them into uncomfortable situations, having to make difficult decisions that they wouldn't want to have to do. He likes to play between checks, pull at defensive structures, create those little gaps, not just for himself, but for his teammates as well. He's a true line elevator that can do a little bit of everything in terms of upping the pace, being a high energy checking winger, while also being a dynamic rush attacker with high end playmaking skill and some really intelligent off puck habits to boot. So a very versatile and adaptable player in that sense. The skating has been a separation tool for quite a bit this season, and we saw that especially at the World Junior Championships, where playing up in age group, which is of course he's been doing all season against pro competition, but to do so against the top U20 players in the world and to completely fit in terms of pace, dynamism, creativity on puck, he wasn't missing a beat at that tournament, which I think speaks volumes for this player and his potential at the NHL level. And he played a lot at that tournament. He started off playing middle of the lineup minutes, but by the end, against Finland and Czechia in the last two games of the tournament, for Team Sweden, he played 18 and 22 minutes respectively. A player who gains his coach's trust at every level, and the playmaking is a really big part of that in terms of creating advantages offensively and putting defenses in just consistently uncomfortable positions. Last but not least, the handling skill is also something quite interesting. As I mentioned, it blends very nicely with the playmaking. He has a very mobile top hand. It's completely unlocked from his upper body. And with really quick puck touches, he keeps tight control at his highest speeds and is comfortable in bringing the puck to the inside, then exploding to the outside to get around defenders, and the puck control at those high speeds through those dynamic and explosive sequences remains really controlled and impressive, and is able to layer a lot of deception and pace into those sequences. So I think this is a player whose handling ability, the rush attacking, is going to project quite easily to the NHL level. What might take a little bit more time is really like sustaining the dynamic qualities of that and the separation ability of those tools at the NHL level. We see that with Pacy players that create through pace outside the NHL. When they arrive in the NHL, where everyone is Pacy, it doesn't always work quite the same. However, still a player that I think has a bunch of upside in that like Seth Jarvis kind of mold, playing inside a team's top six and just being hellish to play against, and a relentless forechecker. And the handling ability off the forecheck, off retrievals, has also been a really important tool for Eklund. I think it's been as important defensively and on retrievals in all three zones as it has been in terms of leading the rush, but just his ability to solve simple problems, get around a single player, and then attack up ice with pace, often attacking the middle as well. There's a lot to like in the habits with this player, and I think if you have yet to watch him and are hearing about all these habits, sounds like an NHL player in terms of how he attacks and how he leverages his tools, but we'll dive more into that in the next segment. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with wonderful pistachios. Wonderful pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fueled for longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days, whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost. They're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's keep the show going here in the second segment by looking at the skating, the physicality, the IQ, and the toolkit before we get into the overall habits, delineating the intelligence of this player, which I think is quite an intriguing facet of his game. So, Victor Eklund, as I mentioned in the last segment, the passing and handling, that interaction is a really, really big component of his game. He's constantly trying to push the pace and open up passing lanes with his handling. He's very deceptive on puck and explosive in terms of cutting across defenders and accessing those lanes, and he pounces on them very quickly when they appear to him, and he's become increasingly comfortable doing so in like no look sequences, trying to make defenders bite with his hips, his feet, and his eyes, and that increased in dynamic quality, I think, has opened up a lot of options for him. But the feet are also an important component of that. The reason he's so comfortable cutting across opponents with that explosivity is because the skating is a clear area of strength. In our elite prospects tool grades, he is a 5.5 grade on our most recent rankings. I think from what I've personally seen, I might veer closer to a 6 on our 9-grade tool scale, which is quite distinctly above average, not quite elite, but with the motor and the stride rate that underlie the pretty decent stride mechanics and the skating habits, I think that this is a player who moves around the ice very efficiently and with a lot of tenacity. So not a player I'm concerned with at all in terms of projecting to the NHL in terms of being a skater. The physicality, despite being undersized, is kind of in the same boat. He has really good leverage mechanics. He gets underneath opponents. He is able to plant his feet, and when he does, he's very difficult to knock off puck. He can be quite engaged in board battles. He keeps his feet moving. He's difficult to pin down and contain, and he's also a player that looks to initiate contact, bump off of opposition in order to create a couple feet of space to either receive a pass and go for a shot, or to execute a playmaking option in that little pocket. So an adaptable player with that physicality, and once he adds weight to his body, you're only going to see that improve, but the habits are there and they are quite strong. In terms of intelligence, we're really going to dive into this with the tactics board, but overall, this is a pacey thinker of the game who also looks to change angles off the rush. He likes to attack different lanes. He's not a just linear north-south kind of player. He likes to go east-west a little bit as well, and the guy that can also integrate a lot of dynamic stops and starts into his rushes, changing the pace, changing his distance from defenders, and creating nice little pockets to create from with those habits. But finally, the last thing I want to talk about with the overall toolkit is the interaction of his brain and his physicality, because I think there's some real upside on the defensive side with this. You can throw in the motor in that as well. This is a player who's just constantly engaged, constantly pestering the opposition, very annoying to play against. And when you add into that these physical habits of initiating contact, which at the moment is mainly seen offensively, but we're seeing increasingly on the defensive side of the puck, also even in his own zone against the cycle, which is a bit of a newer development in his game. A lot to like in terms of those habits. I think there's real upside on the defensive side of the puck, just like on the offensive side of the puck. He's a puck winner and a pace pusher and a playmaker. There's a lot to like here, and I think he's also the kind of player that you can put on just about any line, and he can elevate it. He can make their lives easier He can enhance their strengths as well by creating space and time for them to work with, while also being a player that can lead the charge with the puck. He can also delegate when there are other dynamic players on his line. He's happy to work off puck. He's very strong in that capacity as well. So an adaptable player that I think whoever ends up picking him on draft day will get a Swiss Army knife inside their top six for a really, really long time. But now let's jump into the habits section. For our podcast listeners, this is the time where I crack out the tactics board, so you're welcome to open up YouTube to get the visual alongside the audio version, but I will still be trying to vocalize everything I'm showing on the board so that you can still keep track on the audio-only version of the show. So without further ado, let's jump straight into that.
All right, so let's look at 3 habits in Victor Eklund's game here on the tactics board that I selected. One in terms of off-puck offense, a second in terms of rush offense, and a third in terms of his physical habits. There's a lot to like with this player, and I will try to show a little bit of how he thinks and plays the game. Starting off with off-puck offense in the offensive zone. For the purposes of this video, Victor Eklund will be number 11 in yellow here for Jurgen IF. In reality, he's number 38, but I do not have that number in my chips. So here is Victor Eklund in number 11 playing at left wing inside the top 6 for Jurgen IF. And this is a type of offensive sequence that I've been seeing more and more of. That on the cycle, for instance, when Jurgen is cycling the puck, and you're seeing the opposition drift over, this is a player who's making some really well-timed routes, taking really well-timed routes into the slot. And this is also a guy that, while there have been flashes of this player being incredibly pacey and overskating lanes and taking himself out of position by working too hard, this has been mitigated a little bit in recent weeks and months in terms of being able to time his routes to the net front and stopping when he gets there, and often also getting tips on goal, and not a player that is going to leave this space as long as it is available. And even when it becomes contested, he has the lower body strength to hold off opposition and still get shots off, despite being an undersized 18-year-old playing against men in this league. This is also a guy that uses very quick stops and starts, both with and without the puck, to confuse defenders. So again, going off puck for this first example, in terms of cycling perhaps around number 3. Number 3 is expecting him to pop out either down here or perhaps go around the net, and instead will very quickly just stop in position and then explode down the middle to get to the bumper position towards the net front, and to get between defenders' checks. This is a guy that is able to layer in his explosiveness and his energy to also create offense off puck, and a lot to like in that facet of the game. The rush attacking is the most dynamic quality in Eklund's game at this stage in his development. Let's look at a type of scene that happens regularly, both internationally with Team Sweden and in Hockey Allsvenskan with Jurgen. For instance, if the puck gets rimmed around to Eklund, he likes to take the puck up, and he is a really intelligent rusher who is able to use dynamic feet to push back defenders. This is the first element that he likes to do in terms of pushing them back, getting the puck into more dangerous positions offensively, pushing down the flank. He likes to start on the ice outside and then cut his way inside, either upon entry or later on, and looking for passing options from down low and in those types of situations. But how does he get in those positions? How does he push defenders back? This is a player with a very adaptable skating posture, who also attacks down the flank with very close puck touches, really tight control as a puck handler. Very difficult for defenders to just swat at a loose puck when Eklund is in possession. He forces defenders to commit in on him, and he has that agility and explosiveness to cut around them, to cut across them, to make them look bad in certain situations with his mobility, and a player that reads defenders very well when they commit their weight. So when he's attacking down the flank and a defender commits his weight to the outside, Eklund is immediately going to explode inside or just send an intelligent pass into space for a teammate to rush onto. He reads the situation well. He's not a player that's just going to try to lead solo rushes and carry the puck up himself. He uses his teammates very proactively. Finally, let's look at the physical habits. Victor Eklund is a player that can absorb contact along the boards. He is actually quite happy engaging in board battles down low, getting pinned down with the puck, and using the boards as a playmaking tool, as a problem-solving tool of being pinned along the boards and just chipping the puck off the boards, either rimming it around or a little chip into space that his center can jump onto to keep the puck cycling. Eklund is more than happy to initiate contact, to absorb contact in order to create spaces and lanes to get the puck into to create dangerous chances offensively. So a guy that, despite being undersized, has some really refined physical tools. And beyond that, is also quite creative in using his environment to solve the problems that he encounters. He constantly keeps his feet moving. He's difficult to pin down. He's difficult to contain. And now you see my cat on the board. Hi, Basil. Hi. If I remove cat from board, you will see, you will see that Victor Eklund, with his dynamic feet and his ability to adapt to different situations and keep his feet moving, it has a wide variety of habits that NHL teams really value. And beyond that, I think, is a player that's going to adapt to the NHL style of game, to the NHL pace, a lot more fluidly than other prospects in this year's draft class. But that wraps up this second segment. In the final one, we're going to break down his NHL projection, where he's going to go on draft day, and which NHL players he's most similar to stylistically. But first, a quick message from our sponsors.
Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well very easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options over 8 dietary preferences every single week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's calorie smart, keto, or protein plus. Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. I recently tried out their Protein Plus meals, and they were packed with flavor and kept me full throughout the day. The convenience is just unbeatable. No prep, no mess, and great food in just 2 minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnNHL50 off. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment by diving in to looking forward with Victor Eklund at the draft, at his NHL future, where he might fit in terms of NHL teams, and which NHL players play most like him. Starting off, where do you think this player is going to land on draft day? I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I think this is a player that ends up going in the 5 to 12 range come draft day. I think there's going to be a lot of potential movement in that top range of the draft this year, a bit like we saw last season, where there were surprising names left on the board at 11th overall, like Sam Dickinson, and 13th overall with Zeev Buium. I think Eklund could be available that late. He's undersized. That's always a point against him, and he's one of the older players in this draft class as an October 3rd, 06 birthday. But still, I think that his dynamic qualities, the intelligence, the refined nature of his habits that we just delineated, I think all of that goes in favor of him going inside the top 10 on draft day. And players that play the game like him are becoming indispensable at the NHL level. Players like Seth Jarvis, for instance, who is one of the clear player comps with Eklund, are becoming integral pieces to some of the most dominant teams in the NHL. And I think that will get him picked in that top 12 range at a bare minimum. In that range, there's a bunch of teams I think that could be looking his way, ranging from Seattle to Montreal, but we'll actually explain why those teams might be good fits towards the end of the segment. First, let's start off here with what the player's upside is. We've been talking about him for nearly half an hour at this point already, and I think it's pretty clear that this player has some significant potential as a pace-pushing, playmaking winger inside an NHL top six. Whether that happens on a second line or as a complementary piece on a top line remains to be seen, but I think that the potential to be a real difference maker up the lineup on a contending NHL team is there. In terms of floor, I also think there's a decent amount of safety with this player. I think that barring big injuries or really disastrous development, this player is going to be a useful NHL piece for a long time in a bottom six capacity at least. He has all the tools to be a really good checking winger, pushing the pace, applying a bunch of pressure on the forecheck, while also being able to bring some depth scoring, some depth playmaking, and filling in on the power play in case of injuries, even if things don't quite hit the upside with Eklund. But if they do, you're looking at a player with 70-plus point upside, who becomes a fan favorite and can do just about anything you ask of him and adapt his role to the teammates he finds himself playing alongside inside that top six. Now, player comps, always difficult because there's never a perfect one, but still there are players that have shades of Victor Eklund in them at the NHL level that Eklund can model his game after and learn from in their developments over recent years. First, Seth Jarvis is the easiest one here. Almost in terms of player comps, I think he's the most linear comparable for Eklund in terms of doing what Eklund does at the highest level in a top line capacity on a dominant NHL team in Carolina. I think that Eklund could hit that kind of upside, but that is like the upper extent of his potential in terms of the dogged nature of his forechecking, getting to the middle of the ice, being just tenacious off puck and quite effective physically despite being undersized, and bringing like significant dynamism on puck, and adaptable and variable skill with the puck on the stick as well in terms of creating through handling and playmaking and goal scoring alike, while still having some clear strengths among those tools. William Eklund is the most obvious comparable because he is literally Victor's older brother in San Jose, also playing in a top six capacity at the moment alongside Macklin Celebrini and Tyler Toffoli, a player that has a little bit less hard skill qualities compared to Victor. He's not as high a motor of a player or as tenacious off puck as Victor Eklund is, but I do think that the younger Eklund can learn a lot from William in terms of leveraging his skill and his dynamism at the NHL level against that quality of competition, and in terms of gaining the middle of the ice and what it takes to do that in the NHL. It's taken William a couple seasons to kind of get warmed up to that and to excel, not just under pressure, but playing through contact rather than just around it. That's going to be a bit easier of a learning process for Victor Eklund, but some very clear similarities in how they approach the on-puck area of the game and in terms of how the playmaking creates offensively. Last but not least, I think there are also some elements of Nikolai Ehlers with Victor Eklund in terms of, again, the on puck, the rush attacking, the playmaking, how he likes to use give and goes in the rush, how he implements a lot of just ceaseless pace in those rush sequences. I think he has a higher motor than Nikolai Ehlers does as well. So I think there might be even a little bit more upside, at least compared to what Ehlers has become in Winnipeg, where I don't think he necessarily has been able to flourish to quite the limits of his offensive potential. And Victor Eklund hopefully will be able to do so wherever he does land on draft day. And where might that be? Let's look at some teams that are going to be some interesting fits for this player in that range of the draft. I'm looking at Puckpedia at the moment in terms of the draft list. So, of course, there's going to be movements within these rankings of where teams pick between now and the end of the season and between the end of the season and the draft lottery. So a lot that is still subject to change here, but some teams I think are interesting to note would be the Seattle Kraken, who are currently vying to go at 5th overall on draft day. They need, I think, a little bit more dynamic skill from the wings. They definitely addressed that with Berkeley Catton with their first round selection last season, but I think they would want a little bit more of that with perhaps a bit more pace and intensity to surround players like Matty Beniers, like Shane Wright. Victor Eklund is exactly that. I think he would fit in seamlessly and also embodies a brand of hockey that that the Seattle Kraken would really appreciate, especially with their focus on analytics and advanced stats. I think Victor Eklund is going to drive a lot of really good possession and expected goal numbers in his NHL career. The Buffalo Sabres could really use a player like Eklund in their lineup. They've been drafting a lot of responsible two-way players in recent years, but not so many who can just push the pace incessantly and create through a combination of skill, energy, and of course pace. And Eklund brings those qualities. I think he would bring a different profile and dimension to the Buffalo Sabres attack. And there's, I think, a little bit more variety that team needs in order to take the next step and finally make the playoffs again. The Pittsburgh Penguins are another team that I think could use to reinforce just about any position in their prospect pool. There's a lot of gaps there after all the years of them selling in order to push for the playoffs. But Victor Eklund would bring an element of pace and intensity that team could use no matter what direction they go in the coming years. No matter who leads the rebuild, whether it is Kyle Dubas or some other general manager at the end of the day, I think that Eklund fits the style that any kind of team builder wants to have in their lineup at this stage of where hockey is at and the speed at which the game is played. I think Eklund fits in rather nicely. And last but not least, the Montreal Canadiens. This is their style of player. Victor Eklund plays with the Habs kind of brand of hockey in terms of intensity, in terms of intelligence, in terms of reading and reacting, pushing the play and exploiting gaps. This is a very opportunistic kind of player that can fall back on his physical habits, on his intensity, on his will to win when the goals and points aren't coming, but who has a lot of potential in terms of that. The Habs may very well want to be focusing on center in terms of what they look to reinforce on draft day, but I could also imagine them going out and trading for a more established piece to put in their lineup down the middle, especially if Jake Evans moves by the deadline in the offseason. The Habs may very well want to reinforce the middle and then perhaps open them up to picking a winger on draft day rather than focusing down the middle for a pivot. I think Eklund has the identity of a Montreal Canadian, and they would love how he plays the game of hockey. But that wraps up today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steal break down everything in the fantasy world and where you can learn how to build not only the most competitive, but the most sustainable fantasy roster as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought about the show, what your thoughts are about Victor Eklund, which NHL team would be a really good fit with him, and which NHL player reminds you of Eklund. I'd be very curious to hear your perspectives as well in the comments down below. As per usual, I'm your host, Sebastian High. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you tune back in very, very shortly.